Mary, are you on the line?
Hi, Vidya.
Hi, Mary. Do you know anybody else who's going to be joining us or not joining?
I do know that Greg Kalecki will be absent and Rachel Smith will be absent, but I don't know of anybody else.
In that case, Ms. Krishnan, I think we can move forward. We're running it as a planning commission meeting, so there'll be some time before we get to the training part. And are we recording?
Yes, I believe Mary is recording the meeting. So would you please start it off, and when you come to the training session, I will take over. Okay.
I'd like to call this meeting to order. Mr. Zarzecki, can you please call planning commission roll?
Yes. Ms. Chick?
Janet Chick, Northfield Township, Washtenaw County, Michigan, present.
Mr. Dwyer?
Present in Northfield Township, Michigan.
I do not see Mr. Gustafson on line right now.
He's absent with notice, Mr. Zarzecki.
All right. Mr. Iaquinto?
Here.
Ms. Infante?
Northfield Township, Washtenaw County, Michigan.
Mr. Roman?
Here, Washtenaw County, Michigan, Northfield Township.
And Zarzecki present, Northfield Township, Washtenaw, Michigan.
Thank you. I'll make a motion we adopt the agenda.
Support.
Supported by Ms. Chick. Any questions, comments on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Next item is call to the public. In remaining consistent with the Board of Trustees policy, the first call to the public will be for agenda business items only. General comments will be heard at the last call to the public. Correspondence is not a discussion on the agenda, and everyone has 3 minutes to make any comments regarding any business on the agenda. And I'll let Ms. Krishnan handle that.
Yes, I do not see any raised hands or any members of the public at this time who would like to offer a comment.
Thank you. In that case, there's no clarifications from the commissioners. Everyone received correspondence in the packet. There's no public hearings tonight. We'll go to reports of committees. Board of Trustees report, Ms. Chick.
The Board of Trustees met on May 11th. Pretty much it was general business. The Northfield Community Park request for proposals, they actually received something like 8 park designer proposals, so they'll be going through those. We did discuss the job posting for a building inspector. The thought right now is to work on creating a ad for the position, but contacting local communities around us to see if they have someone that we could use as temporary or use in the future. We also hired April Lantinen as part-time clerical assistant for special elections in the clerk's department. We appointed Kristen Delaney to the DDA. We also appointed Judith Moldenhauer to the Land Preservation Committee to replace Julia Henshaw, whose term ended. And other than that, we talked about the budget for 2021 and 2022, and that's all I have.
Thank you. ZBA report, Mr. Dwyer.
ZBA has not met since our last meeting.
Thank you. Anything from staff, Ms. Berg?
I have nothing. Thank you.
Ms. Krishnan, would you like to comment anything with the planning consultant report?
Not at this time.
Or Mr. Jackson?
No, not this time. I think probably most of you have heard that Julie from our office has left McKenna to pursue other opportunities. So you're going to be seeing my smiling face and Vidya's smiling face to cover the planning and zoning responsibilities. So just want to let everyone know.
Thank you for the clarification. Parks and Recreation report, Mr. Iaquinto.
Thank you. Nothing new since our last meeting. We do have a Parks and Rec meeting tomorrow night at 7 via Zoom. If anyone would like to attend, it is open to the public. And please, there is a link on the township website for it. Thank you.
Downtown Planning Group report, Ms. Infante.
They have not met since our last meeting.
Thank you. There's no unfinished business tonight, so we will go to new business. Item 10A, the joint training session presented by McKenna. And we will go to either Mr. Jackson or Ms. Krishnan.
I'll take it, Mr. Roman. Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for this training session. We hope it will be very interesting and informative to all of you, and the information you get tonight should be helpful to you as you make decisions on many of the projects that come across your desk. The presentation will be done by me, and John will take turns. I will start by sharing my screen. Can everyone see it? Okay. So the joint training session, the fundamental philosophy in planning is that good planning helps create communities that would offer better choices for where and how people live. Planning helps communities to envision their future. It helps them to find a right balance between new development and essential services, environmental protection, and innovative change. This is from the American Planning Association, and this is the underlying foundation behind all of the planning work that is done. So tonight's agenda, what we hope to cover is the essentials of planning and zoning. From there, we will move on to the review procedures for the various type of reviews that you encounter, site plans, conditional land uses, so on and so forth. We will then move on to the role and the function of the Zoning Board of Appeals, managing risk, which is a critical component of the work that you do, and finally, public participation. In order to make this a more interactive presentation, after the end of every section, we will pause and stop for your questions. So any clarifications you need, any concerns you have, or you just want to bring forth an idea to us, that would be the best time to discuss it so the information is fresh in your mind. This presentation will be distributed to all of you, and hard copies are being delivered to Mary Bird by tomorrow or so. And those hard copies will be available for each one of you to keep as a future reference. If ever you have a doubt, you can go back in there and take a look at the points that are being presented. We will start first with the planning and zoning essentials. And I will now turn it over to John Jackson so that he can go over this first section. John, as a co-host, I think you should be able to control the slides too. If not, let me know and I will note them.
Did you say I have control over the slides?
Well, I made you a co-host. Is it not allowing you? In which case, I will scroll the slides for you.
I think you're in charge, Vidya.
Okay.
You're the lead. Okay, so we've been planning consultants here in Michigan at McKenna for over 40 years, over 42 years for that matter. And we've seen a lot of changes over that time. We've seen changes in the legislation. We've seen the way different communities administer these roles and responsibilities. And yet after 42 years, we still get surprised from time to time about the way things happen. So I think this training session is good. It's a good refresher. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with a lot of the terms and the concepts that we're going to talk about, but it's always good to sort of circle back and revisit it just so it's fresh in your mind. And also doing it like this with people that you know, that you're familiar with Vidya and myself. Please feel free to ask questions. There's no bad questions, okay? And if we don't know the answer, we'll find the answer for you and we'll get back to you because we know where you live. So this is really meant to be your presentation, answer your questions, help you figure out how to do your jobs even better than you're already doing them. So, so with that, let's get going, and hopefully we'll have some lively discussion. So the state has adopted 2 acts that provide communities with the authority to have planning and to have zoning. So the Planning and Enabling Act is the act that was adopted by the state that sets the framework for how to adopt a master plan, what goes into a master plan, and that sort of thing. The Michigan Zoning Enabling Act sets out the parameters of how to set up a zoning ordinance and how to administer a zoning ordinance, how to set up a planning commission, how to set up a zoning board of appeals. You can go to the next slide, Vidya. So the Planning and Enabling Act, as I mentioned, really talks about what's involved in the master plan. What sort of things should a community be considering? Land use, environmental issues, demographic issues, social issues, economic development issues, recreation issues, natural resource issues. These are all things that go into the consideration of your master plan. Community data. What are the community's overall aspirations, goals, and objectives? A lot of people associate the future land use plan as the prime element of the master plan, but it's so much more than that. It's really what you want to accomplish and what character you want to have in your community. So it's much more than a map with lines drawn on it. It's about describing the character. It's about setting your values and your priorities. That's really what the master plan talks about. And the Planning and Enabling Act, which was not too long ago amended, also calls for a zoning plan. Now that zoning plan is important because it provides a link between the policies in the master plan and your zoning ordinance. Okay, so that's an important connection that was recently added to the Planning and Enabling Act, relatively recently. So the Zoning Enabling Act, which was adopted in 2006, as I mentioned, it describes what goes into a zoning ordinance. It talks about how you regulate land uses. It talks about how you administer the zoning ordinance, how you make amendments. It sets out the parameters in your ordinance for granting variances. So for instance, I mentioned that the Zoning Enabling Act basically sets the framework. Okay, so in the Zoning Enabling Act, for instance, it will say that a local municipality can establish special zoning provisions like a PUD or special uses. And it says that these types of provisions have to have review standards in your zoning ordinance by which you review these different provisions. My point here is that the Zoning Enabling Act doesn't necessarily have those review provisions specifically in the Zoning Enabling Act, but it says you have to have those provisions in your zoning ordinance. So that's why when you look at the zoning ordinance, it will have the types of things that you need to consider when you're looking at a conditional use or a PUD. It'll have specific standards that you have to review and make findings of. Those don't exist in the Zoning Enabling Act. Those are in your local zoning ordinance. Of course, it sets out the provisions for a zoning map as well. So how the different land uses are regulated. So there's a lot that goes into administering the planning and zoning. Obviously, there's a board of trustees, and the board of trustees is responsible for adopting a lot of these provisions. Specifically, they're responsible for adopting the zoning ordinance and any amendments to the zoning ordinance. In Northfield Township, the Board of Trustees is also responsible for approving conditional uses following recommendations by the Planning Commission. So the Planning Commission is really the first step in the process after, of course, it's gone through the administrative review process. Then it goes to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is responsible for holding a public hearing if required, as well as reviewing things administratively, such as site plans. So the Planning Commission has a very specific role spelled out. The Zoning Board of Appeals has a very specific role spelled out, and Vidya will talk about that later, but they have specific things they're responsible for. In the case of Northfield Township, there's a township manager who's really responsible for administering a lot of the applications and how those are handled and reviewed and prioritized before they even get to the boards and commissions. You have a zoning administrator, and I'll talk about their responsibility in a moment. Obviously, you have staff that's responsible for managing all these different moving parts. You have a township planner, which we're honored to be on the team. You have a township engineer, which is OHM, very highly qualified. We work with them in a number of communities. You have the fire department as well. All of these staff elements contribute to the review process, provide input, provide guidance when the boards and commissions are making their decisions. Okay, so here are the specific roles and responsibilities of each of the boards and commissions. So the Planning Commission, which is appointed by the Board of Trustees, is, and I'm taking this sort of from the broader perspective down to the narrow perspective. So the first responsibility of the Planning Commission is to do the master plan, is to manage the master plan process. They're the ones that are on the front line. They're the ones that participate in setting the policies, the goals and objectives that are in the master plan. They're the ones that typically facilitate the public engagement. They're the ones that are required to hold a public hearing regarding the master plan to make sure that there's been sufficient public engagement. So really, the master plan is the Planning Commission's baby. You can see here that the Board of Trustees has the option of approving the master plan. But really, the Planning Commission is the one that does the heavy lifting in terms of putting the plan together, analyzing alternative approaches, and things like that. And I can talk more about the master plan process. I know quite a few have been through the process not that long ago, but I can talk more about that process here in a few minutes. The Planning Commission is obviously responsible for zoning ordinance recommendations with respect to amendments to the zoning ordinance, adoption of the zoning ordinance, that sort of thing. Planning Commission is responsible for site plan reviews, reviewing subdivisions, and also preparing the annual report. So every year, the Planning Commission is required by the State Planning Act to prepare a list and a report to the Township Board. That report has to include the number of meetings that were held by the Planning Commission. The State Act requires that you have at least 4 meetings a year. I don't think the Northfield Township Planning Commission is in danger of missing that target because it's so busy. But you're supposed to report to the Township Board on what happened during those meetings, how many projects were reviewed, what types of projects were reviewed, what kind of text amendments were considered, all those kind of activities that the Planning Commission engages in. And we've typically helped the township prepare that annual report. One other thing that we typically include in that report is goals for the upcoming year. Okay, so for instance, the Planning Commission may have seen things happen over the course of the year, and they may suggest to the Township Board, well, we need to amend the ordinance, so we'd like you to allocate part of your budget for us to look into amending or updating certain ordinances. Or the planning commission may say, the master plan was updated last year, or 5 years ago. So you should we request that the board allocate funds to update the master plan. So this annual report is really an opportunity for the planning commission to report to the township board, let them know what's going on, what things they should be aware of. The board of trustees, of course, as I mentioned, may or may not update the master plan. It depends on the local community. As I mentioned, they're also responsible for updating the zoning ordinance and adopting the zoning amendments and things of that nature. They're obviously responsible for making appointments to the planning commission as well as the zoning board of appeals, setting budgets, as I mentioned, and also setting the fees. So when applicants come in for a site plan review or a special use review or a PUD or request an appeal or an amendment, they're subject to fees, and those fees are set by the township board. The zoning board of appeals is also appointed, and they have very specific responsibilities. They're responsible for reviewing variances, which are departures from your zoning ordinance. They are also responsible for hearing appeals of decisions made by your zoning administrator. If a zoning administrator rejects something and somebody doesn't believe that was correct, they can appeal that decision to the zoning board of appeals. The ZBA can also make interpretations requested by staff. Staff might say, this part of the ordinance is unclear. We're not sure exactly how to administer it. So we'd like the zoning board of appeals to make a decision. And then that decision becomes binding for future application and administration of that portion of the ordinance. And then there can be other duties assigned by the zoning ordinance as well. So the zoning administrator is basically somebody that functions as a member of the staff team that really is the front line to residents, property owners that come into the township and want to know what they can do with their property, want to know what the procedures are and how to navigate the system of the boards and commissions. They're also responsible for making a lot of zoning decisions that never get to the planning commission or never get to the zoning board of appeals because it's simply not required to go through the site plan process or not required to have a variance or anything of that nature. So they administer a lot of aspects of the zoning ordinance. They obviously have to meet with the public on a regular basis. They typically write reports to the township board, planning commission, and ZBA. A lot of these duties may be delegated from the zoning administrator to other members of a team. So in our case, we function as a zoning administrator for a lot of these functions. So your tools, I mentioned the number one tool is the master plan. And it's really a powerful way to communicate what's important to you as a township. So when someone moves into your community or someone buys property in your community and wonders what they can do with it, their first step should be, let's look at the master plan because we want to know what's important to the community. What are their goals and objectives? Is preserving open space the most important thing to the community, or is economic development? Is it a fast growing, aggressive growing community, or is it one that values preserving natural features, or what exactly is the balance? So looking at the master plan and having an updated master plan is a way to communicate those things. It's a basis for zoning and other land use decisions. I mentioned it's a way to set goals based on public input. And one of the most important things when you go through the master plan process is that you've looked at alternative approaches. What is the right balance of residential uses to commercial uses for your community, for the character of your community? What is the right balance of restricting and preserving natural resources over and above allowing development to occur? All those sort of things get addressed at a high level during the master plan process. And the last thing I want to mention here is that the Planning Enabling Act requires communities to review their master plan every 5 years. And a lot of communities get hung up on what exactly that means. It doesn't mean that you have to unleash the entire master plan update and adoption process. It simply means that you have to go through a deliberate process of looking at your master plan and making sure that the goals and objectives, the policies that are in there, the land use plan, the policies that relate to economic development, natural resource preservation are relevant. And you can simply pass a motion that says we reviewed the plan and it's still very relevant. At the same time, you don't have to wait 5 years to do a master plan update. If there's something in the plan that is not consistent with the goals and objectives and the values of the community, you can make a change at any time. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. So the benefits of having an updated master plan is that you're in a much better position to defend your decision-making process if the decision-making process is truly based on the master plan. So when someone asks for a rezoning, for instance, reviewing it relative to the master plan to make sure it's consistent with the master plan is critical, so that if there's a challenge, either because you've denied the request or because you've approved it and an adjacent property owner might take exception to it, the fact that you've reviewed it according to your updated master plan will put you on a very strong footing in order to defend that decision. It also talks about the benefits of having it is it guides developments so to make sure they're coordinated, to make sure that you're growing in a logical and orderly way. You're not having a patchwork of development across the township. It also allows you to consider and accounts for changing trends. So looking at things like senior housing, has that been addressed in your master plan? How do we accommodate that? It also allows you to plan and promote for the public health, safety, and general welfare based on the current needs. So those are all important things associated with having a current master plan. The zoning ordinance is the law of the land, and it's based on the premise of protecting the public health, safety, and welfare. And as I mentioned a couple of times, it's based on implementing the policies in the master plan. And again, this law, the zoning law, really dictates what each property owner can and can't do on their property. And it divides the property or the community into zones, obviously. And there's been a lot of talk about mixed use and different approaches to that. But the fact of the matter is the zoning ordinance still dictates what range of uses you can have on your property so that development is compatible with adjacent properties. Obviously, the zoning ordinance includes regulations for buildings and structures in terms of height, setbacks, locations, things of that nature. Also, design parameters can be included in the zoning ordinance, and those can be very strict or very loose. And here's basically a comparison between master plan and zoning ordinance, because again, a lot of people interchange aspects of these documents. So for instance, the master plan includes a future land use plan, right? And the zoning ordinance includes a zoning map. So a lot of people get those two maps confused. The fact is that the zoning ordinance and the zoning map dictates what you can do on your property. And I have a graphic here right after this that sort of shows how those two things relate. So for instance, let's say you're a very rural community that is entirely, currently zoned entirely for agriculture. Okay, you may, and you adopt a master plan, and the master plan says you want to have certain areas of the community that are planned for residential, certain parts of the community that are planned for industrial, commercial, and maybe some multiple family. So you wouldn't necessarily want to go out immediately in zone all of the property you have in your master plan for industrial, because it may represent a 20+ year supply of industrial land. So the zoning map, which you see here on the right, may only have a small area designated for manufacturing, with the idea that as the demand for manufacturing grows, then you can rezone property to keep pace with that industrial growth. And the same thing for residential and multiple family. You don't necessarily have to have a zoning map that exactly matches your master plan, future land use map. You grow into it. Okay, this is where you get to ask questions.
So this is the end of our first major section. So please go ahead and ask your questions, Mr. Iaquinto.
Thank you. So as an example, when you're referring to the future land use, such as the situation that we have been looking at for the property at Whitmore Lake Road and North Territorial, future land use of the master plan shows that to be a much higher density than what it is now. So that's kind of what you're referring to when you refer to the future land use of a piece of property that you grow into for a community. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Thank you very much for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
Ms. Chick?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the zoning plan, kind of brushed over that real quickly. Exactly what is the zoning plan? How does it, and how does like the zoning map differ from a zoning plan?
That's a great question. So you can take different approaches, but the most simple approach that I've seen used in master plans is that you'll have a list, not even a map, a list of the future land use categories. Okay, so let's say you have a agricultural district, you have a single family land use category in the master plan, you have a multiple family land use designation in the master plan, you have a, let's say you have central business area shown in your master plan, and then you have a general commercial area shown in your master plan. So then in the, you have a corresponding list of what zoning ordinances would achieve the objectives of that future land use category. Okay, so for instance, for your single family land use, future land use category, you would say that relates to the R1, let's say the R1 zoning district. Okay, and during the master plan process, you may very well have come up with a new land use district. Okay, and you may not have an existing zoning district that relates to that future land use category. So the zoning plan would say, one of the objectives of this master plan is to update the zoning ordinance to create a new district, a new zoning district that relates to this future land use category. So it's a way to translate the future land use policies on the future land use plan into zoning.
Okay. Okay, so I have a couple more things. For the zoning administrator, you listed site inspections. That's different than building inspections, correct?
Absolutely.
Right.
Okay, so you're just going out to look at a site. You're not actually going through and looking at electrical or construction
Correct.
or anything. Okay.
The zoning administrator inspects the site for compliance with a site plan that has been approved by the Planning Commission or a conditional use that has been approved by the Board of Trustees. The building official does their own separate review. It's only when both of those are finalized out, a certificate of occupancy will be issued.
Okay, thank you. And then I see your slide here says, is the master plan a legally enforceable document? My understanding is it's not a legal document. It is a vision or a guide. And then if they're in conflict, which governs the zoning decision? So which governs? We've been telling people the zoning ordinance. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. I think the
The
frequent
best case scenario,
confusion,
obviously, is if the zoning ordinance and the master plan agree with each other. So there won't be, a conflict.
Yeah, I think the issue is that most of the citizens of the township or any community actually have more understanding of the master plan and not much understanding of the zoning ordinance because they're not looking into that kind of detail. So, thank you.
I think the critical difference that John emphasized on the master plan is a policy. It's only a guide, whereas the zoning ordinance is the law. It cannot be deviated from without the action of another body such as the Board of Zoning.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else with questions on this particular section? Ms. Infante?
Thank you. If a parcel has two different zoning designations and the future land use map envisions a single, does that require a separate process of rezoning application? Or is there a default to the future land use map in terms of the rezoning?
No, there's no default based on the future land use map. Whatever the property is zoned is what it can be used for at that given time. The idea would be that eventually, as I mentioned, based on demands and development pressure and so forth, the property would be zoned to reflect the policies of the master plan. So if you have a split zone on a parcel, ideally it would eventually be, maybe the zoning would be zoned to a single category that was consistent with the master plan, but it doesn't happen automatically as a result of the future land use plan.
So if we are done with the first section, I will move on to the next section, which is review procedures. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I saw a raised hand from Mr. Roman. Please go ahead, Mr. Roman.
Thank you. I was unmuting. Can you go over some of the ramifications if the zoning ordinance is not followed as compared to the master plan?
You know, that's kind of a tough call, because there are instances where, as we said, the master plan is a guide, okay? And so there may be changing trends or conditions that dictate a different approach to zoning, which may not be precisely consistent with the master plan. But if that happens, the critical thing is to document the findings in the decision-making process that led to the deviation from the master plan. And also it suggests that the master plan should be updated in a timely fashion. There are some communities that actually believe that the master plan should be updated on a case-by-case basis before a zoning decision is made that deviates from the master plan. You know, and there's two schools of thought there. There's that school of thought, and then there's the thought that having to go through a master plan amendment process is a pretty lengthy and onerous undertaking, and to add that to the process for, let's say, rezoning would lead to a process that could easily take 6 to 9 months. So there's really two schools of thought there. But to arbitrarily deviate from the master plan in a zoning decision could lead to a lawsuit, and you would be exposed. Vidya is going to talk about risk management later. So I think your point is deviating from the master plan in an arbitrary way without a sound body of findings is a dangerous approach, and will lead to risk, unnecessary risk.
Thank you. As is deviating from the zoning ordinance. Right. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I have a quick question. So the not following zoning ordinance or requiring excessive, for example, for a PUD, the zoning ordinance setback requires 50 feet. If we demand or require that they do 100 feet, can we do that? Is that even enforceable when zoning ordinance says it requires 50?
I will go over that as we further go down the presentation, Mr. Olney. I will discuss what can and cannot be requested by you as part of the site plan approval.
I think that last speaker may have had their computer speaker on as well as maybe their phone or something. I think you have two audio devices on. I think that's what's causing that feedback.
Mr. Dwyer, did you have a question?
I do. If I can get my video to go here. All right, there we go. Sorry. Just to follow up on Mr. Roman's point, there seems to me to be some inconsistency whereby in the zoning ordinance, there is a requirement that some developments shall be consistent with the goals and policies of the township master plan, as though it was in some way deferring to the master plan. Is that a contradiction of some sort?
I don't think so. I think that when you review a development proposal, and I think even if you look in the site plan review standards, you want to make sure that the development is consistent with the policies of the master plan. You know, and those policies in the master plan tend to be broader than the ones that are in the zoning ordinance. But still, they help you make decisions regarding compatibility. They help you make decisions based on a policy, for instance, might be providing, you know, a range of housing types in a community. So if you get a development proposal that provides, you know, different types of housing in a single development, you can say, yes, it's consistent with the policy in the master plan of providing a range of housing types. So it's not uncommon for a zoning ordinance to refer to the general policies of the master plan. And that's another way, in addition to the zoning plan is very specific, but tying it that way is a way to link the two documents together.
Yeah.
Yes, Ms. Chick.
Yeah, just real quick, and this, I've actually been thinking about this lately. There's compatibility does not mean that it has to match surrounding areas, correct? It just has to be not even similar, as long as they kind of go together. The problem with compatibility and making decisions is that it's often a very subjective decision. So it's really hard sometimes, I think, for us as planning commissioners to put aside our personal views and look at things objectively and just consider the master plan and the zoning ordinance and not what we like or what we want. So I just want to make it clear, in my understanding, that compatible does not mean it has to match.
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay.
Can I follow up on that really quickly?
Yes, please go ahead.
Such an important point, and you, Mr. Jackson, kept using the phrase about growing into. And I know in the master plan, the term is often harmonious with. I think that's the area where interpretation can get really, for me, I think, challenging. Because at what point is one considering, for example, an application in terms of the current zoning, the future land use map, and where are we in that process of growing into? And I think that area of interpretation is where a lot of challenges arise in terms of trying to link these two documents, one having legal precedence, the other obviously having policy and community precedence.
So let me, respond to a couple of these questions by saying, no one said it was going to be easy for you guys, right? It is not easy. My hat is off to all of you for having to, respond to these high tension environments where you have residents that are passionate you have investors that are passionate, and you have your own passions regarding your community. So it's not an easy task. But and you're chosen for your discretion. You're chosen for your judgment. That's why you're on these boards and commissions. When you talk about things like compatibility and harmonious, it might be something as simple as relocating a driveway on a proposed development so that the traffic coming in and out of a site doesn't adversely impact the adjacent site. That might be all that it takes to be compatible or harmonious. Just the same, it might be harmonious to build a sidewalk that connects the existing development to the new development. That might be what makes it harmonious, right? You know, and there's obviously, you know, the ability to put up screening and things like that, but sort of in my mind, if you have to put up a lot of walls and landscape screening and things like that, maybe the uses really aren't that compatible. I would think that you would look at uses that can coexist and in a positive way, that can enjoy each other's existence over time. Right? When they first come in, when the change first occurs, forget it. I mean, there's going to be people that won't be happy, but eventually over time, those uses will blend together and knit together as part of the bigger fabric.
Thank you, John. Moving on to our next section, which is the main focus of the Planning Commission when you come to site plan reviews. Site plan review is mentioned specifically under the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, which says that a local government may require a site plan. It's not mandatory, but you can require it, but it must specify the body or the official that is responsible for the review. In some cases, it is the zoning commission. Some communities don't have a planning commission, they have just a zoning commission. In some cases, it is completely administratively handled, and in some cases, such as in Northfield, we have a full set planning commission that is responsible for the review. The site plan, once it's approved, becomes an official part of the record for that site itself. So in the future, when you have other users coming in and adding uses to the site or modifying the use, it has to be consistent and coherent with what you have already approved on the site. So subsequent actions that you take on a site plan need to actually keep with the plan that has already been approved for the project. What the procedure and the submission requirements are for the site plan, they need to be specified in the zoning ordinance. In our township's zoning ordinance, we specifically say that a site plan that is submitted must include all the information which is presented in a site plan manual. And the site plan manual is actually a guidebook that tells developers or prospective property owners what are the things that they need to see on an official site plan that is submitted before the Planning Commission. These plans are frequently vetted. They are reviewed first by the zoning administrator and then your planner or planning consultant, engineer. They work on it to get it into a state where it is suitable for the Planning Commission to actually make the big decision. And at that time, your decision can be to approve. You can approve with conditions, or you can deny a site plan based on the requirements of the ordinance and the laws. Now, this ties into where Mr. Olney previously asked. If a site plan, there are two types of uses. When you look at any zoning district, we have principal permitted uses and we have conditional land uses. Principal permitted uses are also called use by right. That is, if a property owner proposes a use that is a principal permitted use and they meet the requirements of the ordinance, you must approve it. Whether you don't, like, for instance, say we have a GC General Commercial District and we allow for gas stations over there. The applicant, it's a principal permitted use. If the gas station is a principal permitted use and the applicant meets all the requirements for vehicular access, circulation, parking, landscaping, screening, dumpster, building architecture, whether you like it at that particular location or not, if it complies with the zoning, you will have to approve it. So that is a very important differentiation to make. A conditional land use, on the other hand, I will discuss further down, has got a little bit more flexibility. State requirement says under the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, all special land uses, in our ordinance, we call it conditional land use, do require submission of a site plan. Planned unit developments also require a site plan. These two are mandated under state law. Whereas the municipal requirement is determined by what's in the zoning ordinance. In the Northfield Township zoning ordinance, we basically require site plan review for all uses and structures except single family dwellings. And if there is anything, any farm buildings that are allowed under the Right to Farm Act. Any change of use in a building, even if it is existing, if it's a change of use, requires site plan approval. An increase or a reduction in the floor area of a structure, or if they tend to deviate from any of the provisions of the ordinance, they will have to go through the site plan approval process. Frequently, the question I get, I serve as your zoning administrator and have been doing so since February of 2016. When I tell an applicant that they need site plan approval, the first question is, so what do you need to see on a site plan? That is a very important document. The site plan is an official record of the site. It is required to be drawn by a professional licensed person. So when the person who is stamping and sealing those plans for you, that comes before you, they are taking responsibility that what is shown on the plan is what the approval will be and what they will stick to, what will be implemented. Our zoning ordinance refers to the site plan checklist manual. We have recently worked with Mary in detail, and the site plan checklist manual has been fine-tuned. That translates into a checklist. This checklist is a comprehensive list. It is common to somebody taking a blank piece of land, a vacant piece of land, and building a brand new structure. And it's the same checklist for somebody who is trying to redo an existing site with a building. So not all items may be required for every project, but it helps to have a checklist for the developer or the property owner to go through and say, okay, these are the things that I can fix. When we are reviewing a brand new site plan, our goal is to get a building that meets all of the requirements of our zoning ordinance. When it's a site with an existing building, our goal is to review for improvements that will bring the site as much into compliance with the zoning ordinance as is feasible. The site plan review process, once again, the Planning Commission reviews will go against the site plan checklist. We check all relevant ordinance standards and the site plan review criteria. Now, the site plan review criteria, I've referenced the section of your zoning ordinance that ties into it. It basically has a bunch of subjective and objective criteria in it. It basically looks at whether the proposed use is a good fit, where it is going to be located. Is it not going to create any traffic issues? These criteria will provide the basis for the Planning Commission asking an applicant for revisions on the site plan. Like John alluded to it previously, if you have a site and there is a driveway shown in a particular location, the use is a principal permitted use, yet you believe the location of the driveway as shown there is not the best design because it's going to create traffic or nuisance issues or conflict, it's not for pedestrian safety. Under the site plan review criteria that the ordinance offers you, you can actually ask the applicant to make those changes to the site plan so that it's more in harmony with those criteria so that you can go ahead and approve it. If a plan strictly deviates from the requirements of the zoning ordinance, you do have the ability to deny the plan. If revisions are needed for the plan, you don't need to approve the plan with the understanding of placing major changes as a condition. You always have the option of tabling a plan, but give clear direction to the applicant to go and make the revisions that are necessary in order for them to come back before you to seek an action on it. When you make your decision on a site plan, do remember state law says that if the site plan contains all the required information and meets all the applicable requirements of the ordinance, you must approve it. You cannot deny it. You can include reasonable conditions if they are related to review standards. For example, what would be a reasonable condition? So if there is a driveway that is coming out from a site onto Whitmore Lake Road, a condition can be if you feel that is an area where traffic travels at 45 miles an hour, you can require the applicant to put in a stop sign at their egress where they're turning out onto the road. So vehicles have to come to a full stop before they exit out of the site. You can ask, if you're looking at a parking lot that is spread out with a lot of spaces, you can require crosswalks to be drawn in the pavement so that there is safe pedestrian access to the building. So the kind of improvements that you can require on the plan itself need to be actually tied to some requirement of the ordinance. Safe pedestrian pathway is a requirement under the Planning Commission site plan review criteria. So you can require sidewalk connections, you can require crosswalks. So those are the kind of conditions that may be reasonable. You cannot require anything other than what the zoning ordinance allows. For instance, if you get a building that's got a good green area in front, you cannot tell the applicant that I would like you to actually create a plaza area here with a bench because people who are walking on the sidewalk would like to sit over there. If that is not an absolute requirement in your ordinance, it probably is a requirement in the WLDD, which is our downtown district, Whitmore Lake Downtown District. But you cannot require it in a district where it's not a requirement in the ordinance. What you require of an applicant has to be tied to the site itself and the improvements. Where a land use is permitted, you cannot deny the land use in that district, nor can you approve a use in a district where it is not allowed. So if somebody wants to come up with, say, a small industrial use, they will present it to you as it's very low-key, it's got only 2 employees, it's no big deal, but the parcel is zoned agricultural. The agricultural parcel, AR district, does not allow for small manufacturing. It doesn't matter if it's 2 employees or 200 employees. Use cannot be permitted in that district. So that is a very important aspect to remember. Now, I mentioned principal permitted uses. The next aspect of that is conditional use permits. Conditional uses are also referred to in some communities as special land uses. There are some others who refer to as special exception uses. These are considered as land uses that are generally compatible with the district that they are being allowed in, but only in certain locations and under certain circumstances. So basically, a use that is permitted in a district as a special land use will have certain additional design requirements. I'll give you an example. For instance, if in a local commercial district, a principal permitted use would be a retail store. So you can have a retail store or you can have a real estate office. Those would be principal permitted uses. A special land use in the same district would probably, it would be, say, it can be a gas station. It's a fast food restaurant with a drive-through. Just say, for example, it's a fast food restaurant with a drive-through. Now, there will be specific requirements for it. It will say the entrance to the drive-through has to be at least 100 feet from the intersection of the nearest street. The drive-through needs to have at least 15 stacking spaces. So it believes that the use is okay for the local commercial district, but only if certain conditions are met, because those conditions are intended to address any negative effects that might arise as a result of allowing that use. In the agricultural district, we allow for single-family homes, we allow for duplexes, we allow for farms, we allow for farm stands. All those are principal permitted uses. But in our zoning ordinance, if somebody wants to build a public or a private park, a government building, an airport, a greenhouse or landscape nurseries, agri-tourism, marijuana grower facilities, all these are considered conditional land uses. Conditional land uses are not only subject to specific criteria, which will be very defined, has to be 100 feet from this distance, has to maintain 1,000 feet from a school. It will also have certain subjective criteria that it is not going to negatively impact land values in the abutting neighborhood. So it's got subjective and it's got objective criteria also. So the Planning Commission, the final say in a conditional land use is the Board of Trustees. The Planning Commission reviews the site plan, reviews the conditional land use. The Planning Commission acts on the site plan but makes a recommendation on the conditional land use, the Board of Trustees, and the Board of Trustees is the final deciding body on whether the conditional land use should be approved or not. The process is a little long. because under state law, once a conditional land use application is turned in, you have to do a notice for a public hearing. Under state law, the public hearing has to be published in a newspaper of local circulation between 15 to 30 days of the meeting when it's going to be scheduled. A notice also needs to be distributed to all property owners within 300 feet of the subject site itself. This gives ample opportunity for the residents of the community and those who are living nearby to actually be prepared that something is coming up here, and if they have any concerns or anything, to make time to appear at the meeting or present their written comments to the township prior to the meeting. So when a completed CUP application is reviewed, the application and fee is collected, the project is reviewed, a notice for a public hearing is published, the Planning Commission will hold a public hearing. They will take in input both for and against the project. They will look at all the reviews on the proposal. They will recommend either approval with conditions, or a denial to the Board of Trustees. While making their decision, the Planning Commission will have to rely on the relevant zoning regulations and the subjective and objective standards of a conditional land use. And that is where your planning consultant or your planner comes in, because when they do their review letter, they evaluate the proposal based upon all of these criteria and provide you with the necessary discussion items for you to be able to make the decision or make the recommendation whether the use can be approved, or it can be approved, but with certain modifications, or no, this is going to be denied. Even if you deny it, the final action is then by the Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees can either concur with the Planning Commission's decision. If the Planning Commission adds conditions, they can add more conditions or remove the conditions, or they can deny the conditional land use approval altogether too. So the final say will be the Board of Trustees. Once a conditional land use has been denied under our zoning ordinance provisions, the property owner cannot apply for the same conditional, the applicant cannot apply for the same conditional use for 365 days at that property. So they will have to wait. So the review considerations for a conditional land use, as I mentioned, there are some specific criteria, and then there are some objective criteria. One would be harmonious with the intent and purpose of the zoning ordinance. This is an often overlooked portion of the zoning ordinance. When you open your zoning ordinance, the first page will be sort of like a preamble, or it would say what the intent and purpose of the zoning ordinance is. Basically, it is to regulate use of land in a sound manner, where you're taking into account the development pressures, you're trying to balance out what the community wants, and you're also trying to balance out the property owners' rights. Consistency with the existing or intended character of the area. And this is where your master plan also comes into play. You're trying to see if the use, conditional land use that is being proposed, does this match what is currently over there, or does it fit in? And is this what the future vision for the community is? The compatibility with the natural environment. This is quite significant in communities where we have wetlands, we have heavily wooded areas. Is this development approval of a conditional land use going to take out a whole stand of trees or a natural resource that is an integral part of the community? A very important thing in Northfield Township. Is it capable of being served by public services and facilities without creating excessive additional requirements? We do have limits on our sewer capacity within the township. We have certain areas that have sewer, other areas that are on septic. So when we look at a development that is a conditional land use that might put a lot of pressure on the existing system of utilities, is there enough well water available? If this development needs to connect to the sewer, is there enough sewer capacity for the system to actually take in? Is this going to be a burden on the township and its taxpayers? So that is also an important consideration when you consider a conditional land use. You also need to make sure that it's not hazardous or disturbing to the existing or future neighboring uses. That is why it ties back into consistency with the master plan. Is this use going to be something that in the short term might seem beneficial, but is going to impact the long-term vision of the community for the area? And finally, what will be the effect of such a use on the nearby properties, and what will be its impact on their values? There is no easy answer to many of these, but they need to be looked at rationally. You have to use the tools that are at your disposal, all the information that is at your disposal, which is the master plan, the future land use plan map. What is the intent of the zoning ordinance? What are your goals and objectives in the master plan? All of those come into play when you're reviewing a conditional land use, especially if it happens to be a contentious one. One of the unique types of conditional land uses that lately the Planning Commission has started getting a whole wave of it, and which the Township Board will also receive, is marijuana facilities. Since the township opted in, you have received multiple applications, and when the ordinance was written, all marijuana facilities are conditional land uses, be it retail, be it processing, be it transporter facility, be it grow facility. All of them are conditional land uses, because such facilities can have impacts on the neighboring properties. While the township opted in to allow these uses, you want to make sure that you're allowing them only in areas and on properties where you think it is going to serve its purpose without negatively impacting those who already live there or what might happen in the future over there. You have to look, when you're looking at marijuana conditional use permit, you look at past precedent. How have you typically reviewed developments and developmental pressures in the particular area where this facility is trying to be located? The township adopted a marijuana facility scoring evaluation, and that worksheet is invaluable because it gives you clear scoring criteria. It's not arbitrary, it's not random. You're assigning points. You meet it, you get a point. You don't meet it, you're not going to get a point. So it gives you something hard. It gives you a hard number to actually base any of your findings of fact on. And finally, the marijuana facility voluntary local development agreement, which is an essential component of when you're approving these conditional land uses. Because while you're approving these uses, and they have in the township helped rejuvenate some of the older sites that were within our community, the sites that have been picked up for these facilities to be located, you still want to make sure that the way the site is designed, the way it is operated, it is safe, secure, and it keeps in mind public health, safety, and welfare, which is the guiding and the foremost goalpost in planning and zoning itself. Before we move to the next section, this is the end of the review procedures section. Are there any questions for me? I would be happy to answer them. Anybody? Oh, yes, Mr. Roman, please go ahead.
Thank you. About your review considerations, I just want to make a point too. It's your page 30. The township is not always the entity that determines all the requirements, and that's very important, such as the county, state requirements, roads, water, sewer, traffic, environmental, etc. So I just want to bring that point. Thank you.
That's a very important point. Thank you. Because yes, the Washington County Road Commission has definitely got a say in all kinds of traffic and driveway improvements, and the health department also has a say in the well and septic improvements. So that's definitely an important consideration. Thank you. Ms.
Thank
Chick?
you.
So I don't know if this has ever happened or not, but a thought came to mind. If a applicant comes before the Planning Commission and everything is perfect, everything is the way it's supposed to be for a conditional use, and for whatever reason the Planning Commission denies it, can the board still approve it?
Yes. The board is the final deciding authority on a conditional land use. They can reverse the decision because the Planning Commission is only making a recommendation. So the Board of Trustees does have the option of reversing the decision and approving the project.
Okay, and vice versa, if the Planning Commission recommends approval and it goes to the board and they deny it, but everything is perfect with that conditional use application, we got problems, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Typically, the Board of Trustees works on planning projects in tandem with the Planning Commission, because the Planning Commission is appointed by the Board of Trustees to carry out the planning work. So in most cases, if the Board of Trustees does not agree with the recommendation of the Planning Commission, it has been my experience that the board reverts the matter back to the Planning Commission with their viewpoints on it. They send it back to the Planning Commission saying, these are our concerns we believe need to be addressed. So the Planning Commission gets to revisit the project, take into consideration what the board's concerns are and take action on the project again.
Thank you.
Sure. Mr. Roman, go ahead.
Yes, it's unrelated, but I just wanted to request of participants to please mute your sound during Ms. Krishnan's presentation so that everyone can hear. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Iaquinto.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask, in some communities, it is up to the PC, while in our community, it's up to the township board on some projects. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then in those communities where it is up to the PC as the final recommending body, do the township boards, are they able to override the PC in those situations?
No, at least in my experience. For example, a slightly different entity, it's a city, but I'm the planner for the city of Rochester. And their planning commission is the final authority on special land uses. The city council does not get involved. And once the planning commission makes a decision on the special land use, I mean, they approve or deny, that decision stands. The city council cannot pick up the planning commission's action because their charter does not give the city council the authority to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else, or we will move to the next section, which is text and map amendments, and John will go over this.
Thank you, Vidya. So we talked a little bit about this before, about making changes to the zoning ordinance or to the zoning map, which are typically referred to as rezonings. These are basically legislative acts that require the final decision to be made by the elected officials or the Board of Trustees. So again, I'll talk about the process here in a minute, but the Township Board is the final decision-making process for any kind of text amendment or rezonings. Amendments may be initiated by the township itself through the Township Board or the Planning Commission. And this might be in an effort to bring the zoning map or zoning ordinance into compliance with master plan. We talked a little bit about that, but it also may be initiated by an applicant, a property owner. And they may ask for a rezoning, which, you know, the township has certainly seen their fair share of rezonings, but an applicant may also ask for a text amendment. So either one of those can come through the application process. And that process is, there has to be an application filled out. It's pretty clear if it's on behalf of a property owner for rezoning, they come and they fill out an application. But even if it's the township initiating a rezoning, there has to be a record, a written record of the request that's being made. So once that application has been filed, either for rezoning or for a text amendment, the Planning Commission sets a public hearing date, and it has to be in a newspaper 15 days prior to the public hearing. This is a process that you heard Vidya go over a minute ago. One thing that's a little different with respect to rezonings, and this happens a lot when a community might initiate a rezoning, again, to bring the zoning map closer to compliance with the master plan. If 10 or fewer parcels are proposed to be rezoned, that would be a situation where an individual property owner, for instance, or a couple property owners, or a single applicant wants to rezone maybe 3 or 4 parcels that are together, then you have to notify people within 300 feet of the property. If, however, the rezoning includes a larger area of more than 10 pieces of property, then you don't have to notify people within 300 feet. All you have to do is put it in the newspaper. And then, of course, the Planning Commission holds a public hearing and makes a recommendation to the Township Board. So the review considerations, here's a list of the typical things that you would want to consider as a planning commission. And obviously you want to make sure it's consistent with the intent of the zoning ordinance, which is to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. And also you need to look at the intent of, for instance, the district that's requested in a rezoning. Is it consistent with the surrounding uses, so on and so forth? But the second one is what I was talking about earlier. Is it consistent with the long-term planning goals of the master plan? So you might get a situation where someone wants to rezone a piece of property in the middle of a residential area to, let's say, multiple family. So the existing zoning in the area is single family. Someone wants to rezone a single property to multiple family, and everyone would say, that's spot zoning. You can't do that. But if it's part of the master plan, then there may be a rationale for granting that. Okay, so it's not spot zoning if it's not necessarily spot zoning if it's consistent with a future land use plan. Obviously, you want to make sure that the rezoning and the text amendment isn't creating something that's exclusionary. You want to make sure that, you know, if it's consistent with the long-term policies of the master plan, it's likely not going to set a negative precedent and may actually encourage future changes that are consistent with the master plan. You want to make sure that a rezoning in particular, we talk about things happening in a logical and orderly manner. Okay, so you want to make sure that if there's a rezoning, that you've looked at the impacts, the demands on service and things like that to make sure that the development that occurs as a result of the rezoning is within the capacity of the township. And then, of course, they recommend approval or denial to the township board and provide the documentation of their findings of fact when they do deliver that recommendation. So the Board of Trustees action then, of course, is to review the findings of fact by the Planning Commission. They may adopt or deny the amendment. They may also send it back to the Planning Commission and say, we want you to explore this issue further. We don't think that this issue was discussed enough at the Planning Commission. Please take another look at it. And then, of course, if the amendment is approved, it has to be noticed in the paper after it's been approved, and then it goes into effect 15 days after that. So I mentioned earlier that the Zoning Enabling Act sets out the framework that allows communities to have these special development provisions like planned unit developments. This is an excerpt right out of the Zoning Enabling Act, where it says the legislative body in the zoning ordinance, through the zoning ordinance, may establish a process for planned unit development, which includes requirements. And those requirements have to be in the zoning ordinance. Okay, so PUD regulations specified in the ordinance shall govern how PUDs are developed within a community. And that includes what are the permitted uses in a planned unit development, what is the degree of regulatory flexibility in terms of lot sizes, setbacks, densities, you know, what degree of deviation and flexibility are you going to allow through the PUD process? All that has to be spelled out in the local zoning ordinance. It's not included in the Zoning Enabling Act. And then, of course, PUD regulations must specify, you know, how it's reviewed, what the conditions of eligibility are. For instance, you can't do a PUD on a property that's less than 10 acres or something of that nature. So you need to establish eligibility criteria and then the procedure for review. So the PUD process in Northfield, we like to start with a pre-application meeting. That's an application that happens at staff, and it's an opportunity for before the applicant invests a lot of money in terms of developing plans and purchasing property and things of that nature, to come in and test the plan. Does it fit within the ordinance requirements? Does it fit within the degree of flexibility that's allowed in the PUD? So we highly encourage applicants to come in for that pre-application process. it eliminates a lot of headaches if they follow, you know, that procedure. Then, of course, there's the preliminary PUD process, which is a more general area plan, and that goes to the public hearing at the Planning Commission and is approved by the Board of Trustees. So that general area plan sets the range of uses, the density, and that sort of thing. Then the final PUD plan, which goes back through a similar process of going to the Planning Commission, who reviews and recommends it, and is finally approved by the Board of Trustees. That's where you nail down all the details. And I think it was the chairman of the Planning Commission mentioned that a lot of these projects will require other entities to approve aspects of the plan, engineering, stormwater from the county, any number of things. And those conditions should be put on approval, so that if for some reason getting those approvals from those other entities requires a deviation from the approved plan, everyone knows that it has to come back or may have to come back for a review at the township. So the review criteria for looking at a planned unit development, we mentioned the intent of the PUD district. Obviously, the intent of the PUD district is to allow flexibility. But here's another example where you'd want to reference the goals and objectives in the master plan. Is the PUD achieving those objectives? Is it compatible? Is it incorporating aspects that are compatible with existing, adjacent, and future development? Is it including land uses that wouldn't otherwise be feasible without the flexibility being requested? Is the type of housing valuable to the community? Is it going to provide housing options for people who want to age in place, for instance? Does it provide that housing option that's consistent with the goals and objectives of the master plan? Is it consistent with the design considerations that are included in your zoning ordinance? Does it include natural materials? Is it traditional design? Is it something that looks like it belongs in Northfield Township? These are the conditions and the questions that need to be asked during the PUD process. The densities, the design standards, and so forth. So the township also has another flexible provision, and that is the open space development. This type of provision is something that's actually required by the Zoning Enabling Act. So communities of a certain type, most townships, are required to have an open space development provision in their ordinance. And in Northfield Township, this type of development is allowed in the AR district, the LR, SR1, and SR2, and requires a minimum of 50% open space. If less than 50% open space is being proposed, or the applicant wishes a density bonus, then it will be reviewed as a conditional use. So this is a great way to encourage this type of conservation development to occur, allowing certain 50% or more to be reviewed by right, and then allowing some degree of flexibility through the conditional use process. That's a great approach. The process is the same as a typical site plan or conditional use review, depending if it's a project that's allowed by right or conditional review, and Vidya's gone over those, so we don't need to rehash that. Okay, so nonconformities. These are, a nonconformity could be a building, it could be a use, it could be a lot that doesn't meet your current zoning requirements, but it was in existence before those zoning requirements were established. And the intent of this provision of the zoning ordinance and the fact that it's allowed or discussed in the Zoning Enabling Act is there's a desire to either eliminate these non-conforming conditions in a community or bring them into compliance. So those are the objectives for having the provisions of the non-conformity in your zoning ordinance. So it's really intended to encourage the gradual elimination of these non-conforming situations. That's why there's limitations on rebuilding a non-conforming building or use if it's destroyed. That's why there's limits and restrictions on expanding these non-conforming uses, is so that gradually they will be phased out and be brought into compliance.
So we are at the end of this section. We would be happy to answer any questions you might have with regard to non-conformities or with text amendments or with PUDs. Ms. Chick, please go ahead.
There we go. Okay, on of course PUDs. I know. So if it's coming, it's done in two phases. There's a preliminary approval, and then there is the final approval. So at the preliminary approval, is that when we place all the conditions on the applicant, or can those conditions be placed as we go along? How does that, or do they have to be placed at final? How does that go?
So the typical approach is that the conditions would reflect what you want to achieve. So during the preliminary review, you may have conditions on there that need to be resolved before final approval. Okay. And they may be conditions that say, we want to make sure that when you come back for final approval, your architecture is of a certain type or a certain nature, so that they don't have to provide those architectural details at the preliminary level. Okay. But you want to put them on notice that when they come back for final approval, that you have a certain expectation with respect to the landscaping, the architecture, you know, those final fit and finishes of the development that are necessary, like I said, to make sure it fits the character of the community. The preliminary review is really to establish the uses, the densities, the general layout of the road layout, for instance, the general location of things like stormwater facilities. And then when they do the prepare for the final, they may make the detention areas or the stormwater management areas a little bigger, a little smaller than you saw in the preliminary. But you can see how it affects the plan before you give them the final approval.
Okay,
so that's the purpose of this.
Yeah, that was a little confusing to me. Exactly when do we place those conditions? And then also in the PUD section, it said that we cannot, and this is in the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, ask for substantive changes. So my question is, what is considered a substantive change? Like, is asking for, I don't know, I want to flip the plan or put something else somewhere else. Is that substantive? How do we determine what substantive is?
Again, I think the point is that during the preliminary review process, once they get through the preliminary review process, right, the developer is being asked to invest in more detailed and expensive engineering efforts. They're being asked to invest more in the development of the project. So they have, an expectation that the number of units that they were granted during the preliminary review process is going to be consistent. So, it's hard to determine exactly what a substantive change is, but if they came back during final and you said, for instance, we want you to eliminate 25% of the units, that most certainly would be substantive.
Okay, so because something smaller, such as, I don't like these bushes, but can you put trees in? That's not substantive, right?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. And then there was a question as well, because they do have to come back twice, that the first at the preliminary, that they do not need the seal on the plans. They only need the seal at the final, the architect's seal.
That would have to be in your review process.
Okay.
So, yeah, do you know if the preliminary requires sealed drawings?
Not off the top of my head, John. I can look it up.
Okay. All right, and I think that is all that I have. So thank you.
Mr. Dwyer?
So I'm looking on your slide here, preliminary, PUD. PC's had the public hearing, they've had the discussion, they've made some sort of recommendation to the trustees. The trustees have talked about it, perhaps had another public hearing. Can they, and it says approval by the Board of Trustees, can they defer it back to the PC without some sort of preliminary approval? Are they allowed to kick it back and say, we're not sure, try again? Or do they have to send it back with either an approval or a denial?
No, they can send it back to the planning commission, just like the rezoning that I mentioned before. They can send it back to the planning commission. Now, to be effective, it should go back to the planning commission with some directives, right? We want you to reconsider this aspect of the plan. We want you to take a look at this issue. We want you to take more time to determine if these standards are met and provide us a more definitive findings of fact as to why you think it has met this standard or has not met this standard. So just sending it back and saying, start over again, that would be the equivalent of basically, well, that wouldn't be very effective.
Okay, that's what I wanted to be sure of. Thank you.
Mr. Roman?
Yes, to answer Ms. Chick's question, the applicant may present a sketch plan or a modified sketch plan to the planning commission for informational purposes. So in reading that, it doesn't really require signed drawings. I looked through that whole section, which is section 36,672, and I didn't see that it was specified, but my assumption is with that statement that wouldn't require signed documents until probably the final. It's just my opinion, though. Thanks.
Mr. Zarzecki?
Yes, my question is going back to where we talked about notices and they have to be placed in the newspaper. In our area, which is more resident or more rural, the distribution of newspapers is probably very limited. And basically newsprint has been going out of print quite extensively. Most people go on the internet for their information nowadays. Has there been any movement or in other areas or other municipalities of different ways of noticing this type of information, some kind of internet distribution or something? I'm concerned that our newspapers aren't really reaching all of the people that they need to anymore.
Yeah, Vidya, you can talk about what you've seen. I think, a lot of communities have very sophisticated, well, I shouldn't even say that. A lot of communities use their website to help make people aware of what's going on. A lot of municipalities have a presence on social media, either, on a Facebook site or things of that nature to help get the word out. So yes, there's a lot of new ways of getting the word out, and there's some old school ways too. Some communities put signs on the property.
We do.
That let people know.
We do.
So, I mean, that, for people who live in the area, that's a very effective way to get the word out for sure.
In most of the other communities where I work, they do use social media. The township operates its own Facebook page or Twitter feed in some cases, and they also post it on the community website. But under state law, it is still states required for a newspaper under general circulation. I don't think state law has caught up with technology yet. So communities still have to follow what the current protocol is. That is, mailing notices and then putting it under our zoning ordinance. We do require a sign to be posted on the property for rezonings, text amendments, which Mary generally makes sure that the applicant is aware of.
And I would also add that, to Vidya's point, what's in the state act is the minimum. So mailing letters to people within 300 feet is the minimum. If you're a rural community and no one lives within 300 feet of a subject, of a conditional use or PUD or rezoning, it might be worthwhile to broaden the distance to which you send public hearing notices out. You might want to send it to people within 1,000 feet if it only adds, a handful of people to the mailing. So those are some tricks that we've seen in other communities.
Ms. Chick, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to Mr. Zarzecki's comment. We don't have a local newspaper. We get notice through MLive or the Ann Arbor News, and not everybody gets newspaper. We do have a website and we are on social media on Facebook, but then we have issues with people not having internet access. So, and we're talking about the entire community, and mostly in the rural area. So it's been a challenge, but we're doing the best we can. We do post signs and that's not required. So we're making an effort. Thank you.
Mr. Iaquinto?
And I believe we increased our radius to 600 feet. Is that correct?
Yeah, in the rural, yes.
So, we have gone the extra mile with notifications of that distance, to try and address and assist that besides the sign. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Muchow.
Yeah, thank you. It seems like PUDs are kind of unique. Can a PUD still be even considered if it doesn't comply 100% with future land use? If the land use is zoned multi-family residential, 1 to 2 families per dwelling, and say someone comes in and puts 8 families per dwelling, can we even consider it, or are we violating the future land use? Which I know isn't the law, but it's current zoning's not even close to that. So that's my big question.
So there was a lot in that question. The PUD is the zoning approach. Okay, so it would become the new zoning for the property. So forget what, I don't want to say forget what is currently zoned, but the PUD would be the new zoning if it gets approved. And provided that the development that occurs within the PUD is consistent with the future land use category for the site, then I think you're on solid ground. Even though it might be a fair departure from what the current zoning is. As long as it's consistent with the intent of the future land use plan and the master plan, you're in solid ground.
Can I ask one more dumb question, just being a little bit new at this? So PUD is actually a rezoning, correct?
That's right.
I'm done asking dumb questions. Thank you.
Not dumb at all. Because, and I'll tell you why, not to belabor this, but in Northfield, PUDs are treated as a rezoning. In other communities, they are approved through a different process. So some communities do it the way Northfield does. Some communities do it through a different process. So it's not a dumb question at all. In Northfield, it's treated as a rezoning.
Thank you for clearing that up.
There are no other questions. We will move on to our next section, which is the Zoning Board of Appeals, and I will report from John. So the Zoning Board of Appeals is the third important body, not exactly in that hierarchy, but it's an important body which functions as a quasi-judicial body, which means it has got legal powers. The things that a Zoning Board of Appeals can act upon first is an appeal of an administrative decision. Like John previously explained, they can, if a property owner feels that an error has been made in a determination by the zoning administrator or the zoning coordinator, and they don't necessarily agree with the decision that has been made, they can appeal the decision, and that decision can be heard by the Board of Zoning Appeals. And in reviewing such an appeal, the Zoning Board of Appeals has to use certain standards. They will see what was the basis for the decision, administrative decision that was made. Was it just arbitrary and capricious, which is a legal term? Did it have any basis? Was it in fact an incorrect decision that was made based on incorrect findings of fact? Was the zoning ordinance incorrectly interpreted? Or was the administrative decision to deny a project or add conditions to it, was it an abuse of a discretionary power that was granted? So the Zoning Board of Appeals has the decision to make a determination on those kind of appeals. The second and most important power of the Board of Zoning Appeals is reviewing requests for dimensional variance. Dimensional means anything that is a number, a setback, size of the building, lot coverage, height, anything that does not meet an established number or a set dimension in the zoning ordinance. And under state law, this has to be reviewed based on practical difficulty, or in the latest version, it has been modified as unnecessary hardship. The basic finding that you look for is there some limitation that is innate to the property itself that prevents the property owner from complying with the zoning requirements? For example, there is a lot and somebody wants to build their dwelling. The rear yard setback is say 50 feet. They want to put their house at 40 feet from the rear yard. The reason for putting it at 40 feet might be that there is an easement in the front of the lot, which takes up a significant chunk of the lot. So the only way to place the house is to keep it out of the easement and thereby encroach into the easement. We have had situations where we have had requests for variance from the setback because the DTE's power line easement goes through the rear of the property, and DTE rules do not allow anything to be placed 15 feet on either side of the easement. So that for properties where it goes right through the middle of the rear yard, it takes away a significant chunk of their land where they can place an accessory structure like a garage or a shed. So those are practical difficulties. Once a variance is approved, it is permanent, and it's a permanent deviation from the zoning ordinance, and it runs with the land in perpetuity. Even 30 years from today, once a variance is granted, the variance will run with the land itself. The variance cannot come off. And as I mentioned, the Board of Zoning Appeals is a quasi-judicial body, which means once the BZA has taken its decision, say the BZA denies somebody's request for variance, that denial cannot be appealed to the Township Board of Trustees. It cannot be appealed to the Planning Commission. The next step is Circuit Court. So the BZA's decision is final and binding. And once they take a decision, that variance is granted for life and will run with the property itself. The Zoning Board of Appeals cannot grant use variances. I previously mentioned allowing for uses that are not allowed within a district. So if somebody wants to say, we have the agricultural district. In the AR district, we allow for single family homes and we allow for duplexes. We don't allow for two separate single family homes. I frequently had people ask me, how come a duplex is allowed, but I have 5 acres? Why can't I put in a primary residence and a mother-in-law apartment separately? Unfortunately, the zoning ordinance does not allow that. And they cannot come before the Zoning Board of Appeals and seek a variance for it because that is a use variance. You're asking to use the property for something that is not permitted under the zoning ordinance. And that is not within the ZBA's powers. The community cannot grant use variance, cannot be considered. So the example of a dimensional variance, somebody is constructing a building in a required setback. The things you would look at is, are there any circumstances that are unique to this property? For example, grade, slope, or the location of a septic field in a place which sort of limits them, or a power line easement. You need to make sure that these conditions are not self-created. If the applicant has done something that has created the hardship for themselves, then that is considered as a self-created hardship. For example, in one of my other clients, with the lakeside community, I frequently receive variance requests for people to build larger garages. And their special condition is that they have an extra 2 jet skis, which they would like to store in the garage. Like, while I really appreciate the fact that they have a jet ski, and I know the jet ski needs to be stored indoors for its safety, that is not a special circumstance. That's self-created. It's nothing that was forced upon them. So the third criteria you would look at is literal interpretation of the ordinance would sort of deny the applicant the rights. If all of the property owners in that neighborhood have similar properties and are being allowed to use their property in a certain way, if there is an established way, would not allowing for the variance on this property alone deprive them of a use that everybody else is being allowed to enjoy? On the other hand, you're not approving a variance and granting a special privilege to someone that you're not going to grant to other people who are located within the same zoning district. Sometimes the board might say, okay, there is an unnecessary hardship or a practical difficulty here, so we can seek granting a setback variance. But is the variance that they're asking for the minimum that is required? Maybe a 10-foot setback variance is enough for them to build their garage. They don't need a 20-foot setback and a 600 square foot garage. So you have to make the determination on what is reasonable. And finally, if you are acting to approve a variance, you need to make sure that it's not going to be injurious to the neighborhood or affect public safety or otherwise detrimental to public interest. For example, if you were approving a variance to build an addition within the side yard setback, is it essentially placing this dwelling now so close to the neighbor that in the event of fire or an emergency personnel or firefighters cannot get through between the two buildings because they are just too close together and they're not compliant with the setback? So it is very important to keep that in mind. So now we come to an interesting question. This is a quiz for all of you, a spot quiz. Which of the following are reasons to approve a variance? The neighbors support it. It's when people ask for sign variances, it's the only sign they make. The ordinance is too strict. It will make the area better. This variance was granted before. It's already built. And we know this person will do a good job, and the variance they're asking is minimal. I mean, it's no big deal. It's only 6 inches. So which one of these do you think is a good reason to approve a variance? Which, if any? Anybody want to venture a guess? Go ahead, Ms. Infante.
I'm thinking you're kind of stuck with F.
It's already built. Actually,
I would say E.
I'm sorry, say that again. E?
Sorry, I thought E. My bad. I didn't mean to chime in above anyone.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Muchow. So this is a trick question. The answer is none. None of them are a reason. Sometimes in variances, there is this philosophy. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. So, sometimes people do build stuff and then you have heard of decks being thrown up over the weekend. Yeah, because there's no code enforcement officer out there. So Friday evening construction starts. By Sunday evening, the deck is in place. And they know it's probably not meeting the ordinance. And then they apply for a variance because they think, hey, it's already built. They have to approve. You don't have to approve a variance just because the structure was illegally built. If you deny it, the applicant will have to bring the deck or whatever structure they have built into compliance with the ordinance. It is a very difficult choice. It places the Board of Zoning Appeals in a very difficult position because it sort of makes you uncomfortable. These are your neighbors, probably the person you're sitting with in church on Sunday or bumping into in the grocery store, and now you're telling them the $50,000 deck that they put in really needs to come out. Half of it needs to come out. It is an uncomfortable situation but it is the right thing to do. That ties into the next section, which is managing risk. I will go back to the trick question that I just asked you, which said, whether approve something that's already been built or not. We will get back to that further down. In planning being what it is, you can't always avoid litigation. There will always be somebody for some reason who might choose to sue you, but you can manage the risk and liability provided you are on solid ground. And you can be on solid ground if you follow all the rules and procedures if you use sound decision-making principles and avoid conflicts of interest. Each one of these is an important aspect, which I will go over in detail more. When making good decisions, it's important before you come to a meeting. Before the meeting, you need to do your homework. And during the meeting, you need to listen to the information that is being presented by all of your consultants, the input from the residents and the public, and also from the other specialists that you have hired to do the job, plus your own knowledge of the project. Emotions frequently run high during meetings, be it a public hearing for conditional land use that is contentious, a PUD, or a variance. But as a board member, you would need to set that aside, and your decision must be based on the standards of the ordinance and facts, not on individual opinions. Before the meeting, make sure you review the agenda and all of the packet materials. It's very, very important because that will give you the background information of the proposal that is coming before you. The site plan, what is the layout of the building? What exactly are they trying to do over here? Take a few minutes to go over the letters of the planner, the engineer, and the fire department. That might give you an idea of the concerns that are being brought forth, whether there is a traffic issue here, whether the building architecture is not in keeping with what Northfield ordinances require, whether the landscaping or the screening is not effective. All those generally the consultants that you have hired for and the experts that you have hired for, that's their job to find those and put those together in reports to you. Take some time to review through those. Look at the standards that will be used for each decision. For the Board of Zoning Appeals, they will look at the specific standards that are set in the ordinance, which is there a practical difficulty? Is this hardship self-created? Is the variance being requested the minimum necessary? Is this applicant being granted some benefit that is not being offered to anybody else? For the Planning Commission, you would look at whether this is harmonious, whether it impacts public health, safety, and welfare, and all of the standards that John went through previously. If you have questions, please do not hesitate to ask for additional information from the staff. The staff and the consultants are there to serve you. They are there to provide you with the tools for you to take the best decision. It is very, very important that you do not discuss the proposal with the applicant, the neighbors, or other officials. Do not disclose your opinion, decision in advance of the meeting, especially to members of the public. There is a legal term for this. It is called ex parte communication. It means you are engaging in discussing a project outside a realm where all of your fellow commissioners or board members have the benefit of the same information. Some of it is quite difficult. You might happen to have a case that is on your next Board of Zoning Appeals agenda. You might go grocery shopping over the weekend to Polly's Market. You might bump into two of the neighbors of the applicant, and they might immediately say, hey, I know you serve on the Board of Zoning Appeals. You know, this is the issue. At that point, even though they are your neighbors or your friends, you would need to tell them that any information they want to present, they need to come to the public meeting and state that or provide a written comment, because it is very important that the other commissioners also have a benefit of the same information that you're receiving. And it's only fair to the applicant that they also know what is the information that is being provided in the decision-making process. So ex parte communication is a critical factor to how you minimize your liability and minimize your risk for getting sued. If a developer realizes that a decision-making process has taken place and has been influenced by information you have received outside the realm of the public meeting, that they are not aware of what has been shared with you, that would give them grounds for their lawsuit. You don't want to expose yourself to that kind of liability. So you can tell the members of the public that their comments are very welcome, but they need to provide them in writing to you in a public setting so that it can be read out at the meeting, or they can actually come in person and share it with you. During the meetings, it's very important to disclose potential conflicts of interest. I will go over what constitutes conflict of interest. Always direct your comments through the chair. It is very important. Conduct all deliberations in the open. Sometimes there might be something on the plan that you're not clear on. You might end up trying to discuss it with the commissioner or the board member who's sitting next to you. That is a no-no. The deliberations need to be done in the open. Asking for clarification is a different thing in case you want to see their plans, but discussing the project, all those deliberations need to be done in the open so everybody can hear you. Participate in the deliberation. If you have certain findings of fact, you have concerns, please make sure to state them clearly on the record. Ask for questions. You are providing a service to the community, which is so much appreciated. So do not hesitate to ask the questions, ask for clarification. Like John said, there are really no bad questions at all. Every question has got a meaning, because if you're asking the question, you can be guaranteed somebody else also had that question run through their mind. So your asking the question will help answer the concerns for several people, not just you. Important, do not act hastily just to move things along. If your agenda is heavy, it is okay to table a project, pick it up at the next meeting, but just because you need to get to the agenda, don't try to rush through it, because decisions made when you're rushed or hastily, then we repent and leisure. We don't want to do that. Once an issue is discussed and everybody has had their say, you're comfortable, don't talk an issue to death. By that we mean don't overanalyze an issue. Discuss it, by all means, ask questions, ask for clarifications. But repeatedly going around the same thing really doesn't serve any purpose. When you vote, do not vote if you do not understand what the motion is. It is very, very important. There is nothing wrong if you tell the person who made the motion, I'm not really clear what we are voting on. Put the motion, please be restated. If you have questions on what exactly that motion implies, don't hesitate to ask that. What is the intent of the motion? You can also do a friendly amendment to the motion. Say one board member makes the motion that says something. You believe a condition needs to be added to that for you to truly feel like you want to support it. You can always ask, I would like to suggest a friendly amendment to the motion. And if the motion maker says they're willing to accept a friendly amendment, you can go ahead and propose what your addition to their motion is, and they can choose to accept it or turn it down, and then it gets added to the motion. So do not hesitate to ask for clarification, because voting on a motion that you're not clear on can do more harm than asking 10 questions just to make sure what exactly you're voting on. While making your decisions, please make findings of fact. If there is a reason for you saying no to something, that has to be, you have to give justification for why it's no. Follow all the rules and procedures and consistently apply the standards. Don't let any bias creep in. Once you sit on a board or commission, you have to remove yourself from all that. You have to separate yourself from the bias, your personal opinions. Then there is a project that is contentious. Their emotions run high. There will be lots of people who will be for it. There'll be lots of people who will be against it. Emotions will run high, which is natural. If people who are going to be impacted by it immediately, they will have a lot to say. Don't act based on emotion. It's important to take everybody's comments into consideration, but just because emotions run high, do not set the findings of fact to the side. Before you take an action, resolve any questions. Don't ask your doubts after the motion has been made and voted on. In case you have a confusion, you're not sure, do not hesitate to ask your consultants who are there. I'm not sure what exactly was meant by that statement. Can you provide clarity on that? If you have a legal question, make sure you ask your legal counsel for input in that before you make the decision. Apply conditions only as appropriate. As I previously mentioned, if you're approving a use or you're approving a variance, apply conditions that are reasonable. The Board of Zoning Appeals has got the power to add significant conditions when they approve a variance, because they are approving a deviation from a set rules in an ordinance. So they can ask for, if they're approving a setback variance, side yard setback variance, which brings them closer to the neighbor, they can add a condition saying you have to plant a row of bushes or something like that in order to provide for privacy, because you're now reducing the side yard setback. That is a reasonable request, because the screening that you're asking for is tied to a reduced side yard setback. Make the motions clear. It is very important for the township to maintain accurate records. Maintain and publish meeting minutes. I know Mary does a fantastic job, and so does the Board of Trustees meeting. The minutes are all cleanly published. and they are adopted. That is very important because minimizing your risk also involves keeping in mind that any and all of the public meeting or documentation is subject to a Freedom of Information Act request. You want to have all your information in hand, so if somebody asks to review it, the information is present. Mistakes happen. It's human to err. Sometimes mistakes happen, but as soon as you realize a mistake has happened, at the earliest possible opportunity, the mistake needs to be corrected. Maybe there is a mistake in the minutes. Maybe there's a mistake in the wording of the motion. Make sure you correct it at the earliest available opportunity. While making sound decisions, this is another sort of trick question, but not really. Which of the following are reasons to approve or deny a request? Many people came to object. It's the only sign, building type in case of corporate franchises. That's the justification really for a variance. That's our corporate style. It'll make the area better or it'll make the area worse. We know he, she will do a good or a bad job. I really don't like the way it looks, or I really like how beautiful this looks. The ordinance is too strict or too lenient. And last of all, the fear that we are going to get sued if we don't okay this. So which would be the reasons to approve or deny a request? Anyone want to take a guess at these? There is more than one answer. That's the clue.
I will say it is C.
Make the area better or worse. Okay, so let's go and see.
Darn it.
So the trick question here is none of it except for G. The reason we say we will get sued if we do or we don't is because when the Board of Zoning Appeals or the Board of Trustees and Planning Commission make a decision, say on a conditional use or a variance, you make findings of fact. If you don't make sound findings of fact and you make a decision to approve a variance, you are setting a precedent. So if for no reason you told one guy it's okay, he builds within 5 foot of his side yard setback, but the next guy street over comes and asks for the same thing, you're like, no, we don't think so. It's not going to look good here. If they sue you, their first thing is going to be the guy on the next street. While it's always said that every variance case is reviewed on its independent merit, that is true. However, if you make a decision that are not based on sound findings of fact, you open yourself up for setting a precedent without a basis, in which case you open yourself up for liability and getting sued. So it is important. When you turn down a request, it is a difficult thing because you have, when the Board of Zoning Appeals gets homeowners coming before them, asking, you probably know the person, you probably crossed the person, you feel bad about turning down your request. But before you feel bad when you're turning down a request, remember that there are, for every one variance that you're denying, there are hundreds or possibly thousands of property owners who did comply with the ordinance. Also try to remember the time and effort that the township, the planning commission, the public that turned up for the public hearings and the Board of Trustees have spent in developing that zoning ordinance and adopting the regulations. How effective will your zoning ordinance be if the word just gets out that, hey, you just have to ask for a variance nicely and you'll get it? If it goes that way, then your zoning ordinance will not stand at all. It will be challenged. Well, it's a slippery slope. Once you grant a deviation or a variance without relying on the fundamentals, from there it's a slippery slope. It's difficult to recover from that. So make sure that when you're in the dilemma, like I'm not sure whether turning it down. It's a nice guy. He's got a beautiful house. He just wants a fence that is 8 feet tall. 2 more feet is not going to hurt anybody. Remember, there are lots of 6-foot fences. And then remember, if you get one 8-foot fence, you can get 8-foot fences all over the place too. So always make sure you have that clarity in your mind. Conflict of interest, a very important aspect, be it a planning commission activity or the Board of Zoning Appeals activity. Members must abstain from discussion and zoning if you have any financial interest. Either you're employed, you own or lease the property that is involved, or have its value affected. If you're in any way going to be financially impacted by the project, you need to reveal that as a conflict of interest. If you happen to be a relative or a close friend of the person who's actually applying, or if a township official is actually representing an applicant in a request for a variance or a PUD approval, that would constitute a conflict of interest. Here, now this is one more trick question. Which one of the following would constitute a conflict of interest? You are the applicant. Applicant is a relative. Applicant is a neighbor. Now your firm works for the applicant. Applicant is a business associate, is a business competitor, and by turning them down, you're taking them down. Don't want to vote contrary to overwhelming public comment. So say 30 people show up saying, no, 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 we don't want. Which one of these do you think? Go ahead, Jen.
All of them, all of them.
All of them. Okay, anybody else?
All.
That's most of them at least.
This is interesting. So, conflict of interest. If you're the applicant, you cannot vote on your own project. If you're the applicant's relative, maybe, but does not necessarily mean it. If you're a neighbor, sometimes in smaller communities, when you get the 300-foot notice, you might be the immediate neighbor on these smaller lots. I mean, if you're, say, in the WLDD district, you're on Margaret Street or one of those places, 300 feet can pick up quite a few neighbors. Your firm works for the applicant, possibly. If the applicant is a business associate, also possibly. Business competitor is definitely a yes, because approval or denial might have a financial impact on them and thereby you. And the last one is you do not want to vote contrary to public comment. Anytime you perceive, when in doubt, always disclose a conflict of interest. So, for instance, when you have a conflict of interest, if you think there is, say your neighbor, next door neighbor is the one who is the person. So you would say at the meeting that this particular person who is approached with this request for a variance is my neighbor 2 doors down, and we are all part of the same block barbecue party. Disclose it. In some cases, when it is just a neighbor, wherever I stated maybe, to disclose your interest, and the rest of the board can choose to vote on whether that's a conflict of interest or not. The chairman might say, you know, I don't think just because you live within 3 doors down to that person, it is a conflict of interest. And the rest of the board, if you want, you can take a vote on it and say, yes, we believe it's not a conflict of interest, and that is fine, they can remain. But if there is a conflict of interest, such as a financial benefit, which is key, or you happen to be a relative of the person, disclose it and then excuse yourself and depart. When you depart, you actually, if you're sitting at the meeting dais, you need to get up and leave your seat. You can, in most cases, people actually leave the room. They wait outside the room when the deliberation is going on. In some cases, I do have the member who have excused themselves sit at the back of the room, but they do not participate in the discussion, and they most definitely do not participate in the vote. So conflict of interest is very important to disclose, because that is what will minimize your liability and your risk. If you have a conflict and then you happen to participate in the voting and the decision does not go in favor of the applicant or the property developer, and the developer chooses to sue the township, the first thing they're going to say is he purposely voted against me because he knew if I opened my business, he would lose business. So that would be considered as it's a big no-no. So whenever in doubt, disclose a conflict of interest, even if it sounds vague. The board can vote if they think it is not a major thing, but if it is financial or closely related, please for sure get up, excuse yourself, and depart from the meeting. John, would you like to add something to that?
No, I think that's exactly the issue. You need to identify it, and then, you know, when they're considering whether or not being a neighbor is a conflict, they may ask if you can be impartial, you know, and so that might be, you know, how the issue gets resolved.
It's I had one situation where the person was not an immediate neighbor, but they had a home-based daycare facility and they were taking care of the children of the applicant. So that is definitely a conflict of interest because you have something set to gain in terms of daycare fees or childcare fees. So the good thing was to disclose that, excuse, and depart. So public participation in these meetings, what is required? all public meetings must be open to the public. You have to give the public an opportunity to speak, and I think we do a great job in Northfield Township in making sure that the public is heard. Chairman Roman mentioned that you have called to the public at the beginning of a meeting and also called to the public at the end of the meeting, which gives them ample opportunity to present their comments. When you have public hearings, the public notice of request is done, and then you have a public comment period on the agenda item, like you have on the agenda item and for items that are not on the agenda. It is very important that when you have a public hearing, the chairman of the respective board has a control on the public comment. While it's very important to give every member of the audience or the public an opportunity to comment, it cannot become a forum for bashing or for back and forth discussions. Open the public hearing, recognize the speaker, give them ample opportunity to speak their comments. Sometimes a member of the public might choose to come back a second time and speak. Make sure that everybody gets the time. If there is a bigger project that is going to be contentious, if there is a homeowners association, maybe they can elect one representative to come and speak on their behalf for a longer duration of time to put forth all their concerns. Once the public hearing is closed, it must remain closed. Once the board starts its deliberation, I frequently see it, once the board starts its deliberation, you will have members of the public saying, I have a comment, I want to say something else. Do not open it up again. That while getting public input is critical, make sure your public opinion comment period is kept open for a significant time and every member is given the opportunity to speak. Once the public hearing is closed and the board starts its deliberation, you need to keep it to the board deliberation. Ask your questions and clarifications that you need. It cannot keep going back and forth, open kind of discussion. It cannot become a discussion item at that time. You can always ask for clarification from a member of the public if they made a statement that you're not sure where they're coming from. That can always be done, but do not engage in closing a public hearing, opening it up, closing it again. So you need to take care so that the meeting is kept structured and orderly. The plans, studies, etc., when you do a public hearing, for instance, like it's the master plan public input sessions, that is up to the municipality. You can decide what kind of public input sessions you want. You want it more informal, or do you want it broken up into smaller groups for public comment, or do you want it more structured? So there is more flexibility when you come to those kind of things, park and rec master plan, or your master plan itself, or a sub-area plan for a particular area. You can have those on a different scale. When you do a public notice, which we previously discussed, notice in the local papers, mailed notices, Northfield Township's requirements are structured just along the lines of the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act. Plus, the township also requires signs to be posted on the property whenever there is a PUD, there is a rezoning, or a conditional land use request. Our ordinance does specify placement of the sign along a street frontage and what the lettering of the sign should be. It does not specify the angle at which it should be placed. I believe recently we had a concern from a resident that the angle at which the sign is placed is not optimally visible for drivers. However, the applicant had placed the signage in conformance with what was required by our ordinance. We can always request the applicant to post a second sign so that it is in public benefit that they can see. But as long as they comply with the ordinance, we cannot mandate a second sign just because the first one was not considered to be as legible as everybody wanted it. When you have public hearings, land use discussions frequently bring out strong opinions. And be fair, let everybody have the opportunity to talk, those who are for and those who are against. Follow the rules, try to control your emotions, which is quite difficult, especially when it's a smaller or a close-knit community where people know each other. And above all, listen, because many of the comments will have merits. They are based on reasoning. You know, when somebody supports a project or opposes it, they need to show their reasons why they're taking the position that they are. So listen to it, because some of them might be valid reasons, others might not. During public hearings, you remember there will always be differing opinions. And data proves, and it is a fact, that those who oppose a project will be more likely to attend a hearing and speak against it than those who support a project. It's funny, but that is common in all business, isn't it? When a retail employee does a good job, it's rare that a customer calls their manager and says they did a fabulous job. But if they did a bad job, you bet every single customer would call up and tell the manager they just did a crappy job. So negative comments are more likely to be at the forefront than the positive comments. So take both of them into equal account. Public pressure alone should not be the reason for approval or denial. Just because the public thinks it is the greatest thing to happen over there, that cannot be a reason to approve a project. Just because public thinks that is the worst project ever to come in here is not a reason to deny. You have a zoning ordinance that is your law book that guides you in what should and should not be done, and your master plan that is a vision that gives you a long-term range. They reflect your community. Those two documents were not adopted in isolation. They were adopted after input of all the citizens of the community. So they are a true reflection of what you need to see on the site, not just the few people who come out to support or the few people who come out to oppose a project on one specific site. You must consistently follow the law and the written rules of procedure. As long as you do that, your zoning ordinance will stand sound and you will be able to defend yourself against any such opposition. Finally, redevelopment-ready community recommendations. John, would you like to take this slide, please, and go over it since you have the expertise in this?
So this is a program that is put together years ago and has been refined, and it offers a series of best practices for communities that want to have streamlined procedures, that want to have consistent decision-making processes, that want to inform their citizens in a consistent and an effective way. So the state has this redevelopment ready program where if a community puts these best practices into place in the form of policies, in the form of updated plans and zoning, then they can get recognized and certified by the state of Michigan as a redevelopment ready certified community. And basically what that would mean for Northfield Township is there may be some redevelopment assistance on some of its downtown redevelopment projects in the form of gap financing. That's really the carrot behind incorporating these best practices. So in this particular instance, they're talking about having a public participation plan for a community, okay? And so that they would suggest that the plan identifies key stakeholders, including those not normally at the visioning table. So in other words, if you're going to do a plan update, look at other ways to keep people aware of what's going on. Use the website for people that want to know what's going on but don't want to leave their house. They just want to know what's going on. Newsletters, mailings, things that go out with your normal township information, things that go out to your, I hate to say it, but, any kind of tax bill, anything like that, let them know. Use it as an opportunity to let them know what else is going on. The plan describes public participation methods so that when you're going to undergo a plan, tell them in advance, before you start the plan, tell them that there are going to be opportunities for public comment and engagement. So let them know ahead of time and then give them a schedule of the public engagement opportunities far enough in advance so that they can make arrangements to be there or to provide you with written comments if they know they can't. The plan identifies how the community will report the overall results of the engagement efforts. So again, there's nothing more frustrating for a citizen or a resident to come to a big visioning session and to pour out their heart and soul into what they think is important, and then they never hear what came of it. So let them know and put the results out there so they can see the results. The community reviews and updates the plan on a regular basis. So, again, there's constantly evolving technology, constantly evolving methods for getting people engaged. So you need to consistently look at those type of engagement opportunity. So these are the best practices, and you can see if the ones on the left are basically the essentials, the minimum. And then on the right, if you want to get certified, these are the things that you would want in your participation plan. So it's a checklist. It's an opportunity for you to have a consistent way of communicating and engaging the public. And this doesn't just apply to a major master plan update or a major zoning amendment or things like that. It could be for a redevelopment proposal. It could be for any number of activities that are being considered at your level, at the planning commission, at the township board. It's a way to communicate. So that's basically what that is.
So that comes to the end of our presentation, and I and John would be happy to take any questions you have regarding RRC or public hearing, Board of Zoning Appeals functions, conflict of interest, anything. Please go ahead, Janet.
So we've already been investigating the redevelopment ready communities. In fact, some of our appointed and elected officials have already gone through the training. So we're working on it. It's very comprehensive and a long process, and we would like everybody appointed and elected officials to take the training. We just need to move it forward, but we're headed in that direction. So I appreciate that, John.
Good.
Anybody else with any questions, concerns, comments? Yes.
Exceptionally helpful. Thank you.
Oh, our pleasure. Thank you so much for giving John and me the opportunity to actually come and present before all of you tonight. We are available if you have any questions or any of these slides, you think about it some more, you have a concern about what exactly it means, please do not hesitate to send me an email. Shoot me an email. Mary has my email. She can share it with you. I would be more than happy to help out.
And if there's a specific topic that you would like addressed at an upcoming planning commission meeting, we can definitely carve out some time on the agenda to address an issue. And, obviously with these meetings being recorded and things of that nature, hopefully it will be available to anyone else that is interested as well. So happy to do that.
Yeah, and I thank you very much. It was a really, really good information. It helped me feel a little bit more comfortable in some of the thinking that I've been doing and talking to people and making decisions. And Vidya is excellent at responding to any kind of questions that you have. And I so appreciate her. And I'm happy to have her in the township. So thank you. And you too, John. Thank you.
Thank you. That's wonderful to hear. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll continue on. Thank you very much. Item 11, approval of preceding minutes. I did not receive or review them. If they were available, I didn't review them. So I'd like to make a motion to postpone until our next meeting.
Support.
Support by Mr. Iaquinto. Anybody have questions, comments on that? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it. We'll go to final call to public. Ms. Krishnan, I'll let you run that and I will mind the time.
I do not see anyone with raised hands, Mr. Roman. There is no public comment at this time.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We'll go to final, comments from commissioners. We'll begin with Ms. Infante.
Again, this was just, as Ms. Chick said, it did help clarify a lot of the thinking that I've been doing, and everything you said had a real relevant application. So just really, thank you both so very much.
Mr. Dwyer.
Just to echo that, thank you to McKenna. I pulled out 7 really important points to me tonight. It may not seem like a lot, but 7 seems to be progress. So thank you.
Mr. Zarzecki.
Yes, I'd like to thank McKenna also. they did answer several questions I had and gave me some good ideas that I'm going to have to be researching myself a little bit. So thank you very much.
Ms. Chick.
Well, I think I said what I had to say, but I do appreciate the effort that was put into the training tonight. And I'm very glad that it's recorded because I think the public would do well to listen to it as well, so they understand a little bit better what we have to do and what decisions and how we have to make decisions. Thank you.
Mr. Iaquinto.
No comment. Thank you, sir.
I think it's all been covered, so I'll have no comment. I'd like to announce the next regular meeting of June 2nd, 2021, and make a motion to adjourn.
Support.
Support by Mr. Iaquinto. All in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you. Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you.
Good
Good
night,
night,
everyone.
everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.